originating from the podcast studio inside FAM 360's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. The Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast is designed to encourage, equip, and inspire our audience through a combination of inspirational stories and real-life experiences shared by other successful and skilled leaders in a variety of vocations. We hope that the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast empowers each one of us to step out, step up, and ultimately thrive as leaders. Now here's our host, Mr. Matt Maloney.
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Matt Maloney, and I am really thrilled. This is going to be a fun session, guys. This is going to be a fun session. I'm thrilled to have a very close friend of mine, and we've become close just over the last few years through just different community connections and whatnot. But and I'm going to formally introduce him in a minute. His name is John Flores. But before I do, I thought this quote from Winston Churchill really hit home with me for John and today and some of the things we're going to talk about. It says, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And we're going to learn a lot about that today with John. John, first of all, thank you for joining me on this podcast. It really is an honor to have you here. John is, he personifies everything you can think about when it comes to leadership. And I mean that sincerely. When I think about leadership and I close my eyes, right, and I think about just in my circle of friends and influence, who stands out to me, John Flores is at the top of that. And I mean that sincerely. He's a community leader, a family leader, a business leader, dabbled in a little politics, and there's a history there on that, which is a family history on that, which is pretty cool. So, but anyways, John is the vice president of strategic growth for an organization called Promise 686. It's an organization that's near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons. We have had their president and CEO on this podcast before, Andy Cook. Shout out to Andy. John's here today. He's not playing hooky. He's here in the studio in our Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast studios. So, but today we're going to learn about some life lessons in leadership from John, and really specifically what I think maybe you classified to me as three critical factors that have impacted your life in leadership. One is mentorship. The second is thriving through failure, and the third is restoration. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. So John, thanks for being on the show here. First, just for the audience, and I know I introduced you with your title, but just talk a little about what do you do as the Vice President of Strategic Growth at Promise 686?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I don't really know how to respond to your kind words. And as a leader, I struggle with the insecurity of being a leader, right? Not actually feeling like I am a leader. So I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the invite. Yeah, so as Vice President of Strategic Growth, it's a little bit up and above kind of standard development and fundraising in the nonprofit world. It's really overseeing marketing, culture, and fundraising and development. So that's really what we do on a day-to-day basis is set strategy. We pursue donors, prospective donors. We try to identify corporate opportunities, strategic partnerships, those types of things, all while strengthening our internal culture, which bleeds into your external culture, which bleeds into your fundraising and development and how you interact with donors. And then how are we telling our story? How are we getting stories from the end of the line life change in the organization? How are we disseminating that back up and through the organization and then externally, both for the purpose of fundraising, the purpose of stewarding donors, but then also just expanding the footprint of who we are because we think our services and our model there's still a lot of opportunity to make an impact across the country. Yeah,
well, you're fortunate to work for and work with and lead an organization that, in of itself is so impactful across the community and serves such a huge need. And I've seen firsthand what you've done just in the short while that you've been with this organization, and it's been a game changer. And I know they think the same thing. So. So let's step outside of that for just a second. Can you share a personal experience of when you yourself, let's not be bashful, okay? It's all right. You don't have to be modest, but where you felt like that you really thrived, what we like to call here is above and beyond, where you went above and beyond in just something that you were leading or in leadership? And it doesn't have to be with your current, it could be, wherever in life.
Yeah, that's a great question. To be candid, I texted Amy about an hour and a half ago. Amy's my wife. And I said, hey, when's a situation where I went above and beyond in leadership? So I needed a little bit of outside help. And she actually reminded me of something that I think is very true. I had the opportunity to lead a Be the Bridge group last year. And obviously the race conversation in our country has been a extremely hot topic and necessary topic to be leaned into, pursued, and really kind of pulling the cover off of a lot of what's happening in the country. And so I was asked to lead a Be the Bridge group last year. It was all virtual, unfortunately, due to COVID.
Yeah.
But the makeup of the group was really interesting. Obviously, it was diverse in light of its purpose, but we had everything from a 32-year-old white couple that lives in Greenville who's just born and bred in the South, right? To 65-year-old influential Black individual in Philadelphia who has been an MSNBC contributor, has been a healthcare executive, all the way to a thriving 30-year-old Black entrepreneur in the middle of New York City. And then kind of sporadic, individuals from different races and ages across the rest of the group.
A diverse set of people in this group. Yeah.
Exactly. And for me as a leader, I was extremely intimidated, right? Yeah. It's difficult to navigate. What do I say? What can I say? What are the words I can't say? What questions am I fearful to ask for the thought that it might offend somebody? And so really kind of leading that group of people that I thought were more smart than me. Their experiences in life were different than me.
Yeah.
But setting the table where we could have a really honest conversation.
Yeah.
And really from that first moment that we were together virtually saying, okay, this conversation is impossible to have in a lot of arenas in this country.
Yeah.
Let's not let that be the case here.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have questions that you are scared to ask in your community or your business, let's let them be safe here. And let's all agree that they're okay to be safe here. Yeah. And so I learned a lot of things that thought that I knew that completely were flipped upside down.
Really?
And really, what do I think in terms of the issue of racial reconciliation? What do I think in terms of reparations? What do I think in terms of the story and the narrative in our own family when it comes to this subject matter in our country today? And so I felt very under-equipped going into it.
Yep.
But really taking a step of faith and leading it, I think was a situation where I was pulled into leading above and beyond what I felt capable of doing.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a misnomer that, and I talked about this on another episode with another guest about how people think that, in leadership, the leader has all the answers. They know what's going on. That's not true at all. Mm-hmm. And I think every family, certainly every American and certainly every leader of any organization has been over the last 24 to 28 months has been thrust into this environment of a lot of unknowns. We're trying to figure it out. And I talked about on another episode that in times of chaos, people crave certainty, but we can't always give them certainty. We don't know the outcomes of what's going to happen, right? So we have to approach it with humility. We have to approach it with vulnerability. Mm-hmm. But what we can provide is clarity. And what you just talked about when you were in the group, kind of laying the ground rules saying, look, let's be clear on what our objectives are. Let's be clear on how we're going to talk. And let's be clear that we don't really know. Right. I don't know anything about this topic. I think I know a little bit, but I really don't. And so I'm going to be vulnerable and with humility and approach it. And that's how progress starts to happen. It sounds like.
Well, I totally agree. And I think what's rare in leadership today is people admitting that they don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And I think you talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability leads to connection, it leads to building equity,
it's huge.
Honesty, all those types of things. And I think if leaders were more willing to go, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. I think that really begins to strengthen the bond of a team. Yeah. And then you can actually go, okay, well, here's actually where we are.
Yeah.
We're not going to think we're all the way up here.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have the answers. Let's labor and figure it out together. Yeah. I think that actually is above and beyond in terms of leadership.
Without a doubt.
Because it's rare.
Without a doubt. And the quicker that we as leaders in organizations learn that, I think the healthier the organization is going to be. So,
well, and I think when I think of our parents' generation of leadership, it was, we have to have the answers, right? Mm-hmm. And my dad will probably hear this, like even in a family leadership dynamic where him is my 68-year-old dad, there's still that culture of I've got to be buttoned up and have the right answers. And I really think the inverse is true. It's going, I don't know. I have no idea. And I think people go, I can follow that. Because I'm a part of the process.
That's right.
And so I think leading in that is rare comparing our parents' generation to ourselves, but I think it creates way stronger bonds and teams.
You nailed it. So John, we all have to do hard things, like I said, as leaders, whether it be in the community, in our home, we have to make tough decisions. So what has been the hardest thing that you've had to encounter as a leader in either the existing organization or a prior organization that you've been a part of? And how did you navigate through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's hard for me as a 7-8 on the Enneagram to have hard conversations. Now, the more equity I have with you, the longer I've known you, the more I trust you, the more that I think you trust me, I can have those conversations. I could call you and say, Matt, I feel like what you're doing is wrong.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
And I don't think that you would say, well, screw this, I'm out of here. We're never going to be friends anymore. I feel like you would have the ears to hear and the heart to listen. But it's really hard for me in relationships that are not that high equity to have hard conversations. And there was a girl on my team in a previous role that we couldn't have really breakthrough occur. It was anytime there was success in the organization, it was proactively tied to herself, right? Hey, this may be the biggest gift that we ever get. And we would hear it like every day. And it wasn't, hey, this could be transformational for the organization. It was just through the lens of myself, I'm adding value. And that's what we heard and that's what we felt. And it really began to lead to a lot of friction with other team members, with other verticals in the organization. And so the CEO and I had to sit down and really work through methodically, how in the world do we drive this conversation with this individual who is very, very fragile?
And she, obviously the person was fragile, right? There's something there, just like all of us, we're broken, and our brokenness shapes sometimes our attitude
100%
towards situations, right? And so,
And that brokenness, and there's a lot of detail to this that we can go into later, that brokenness it bubbled up and out into one-on-one conversations, corporate-wide conversations. And so it was becoming a cancer really at the end of the day. And so we actually worked with a counselor for 2 90-minute sessions of how in the world do we bring truth to this? How do we bring truth to this individual in a loving way? Because we cared about the person.
So she wasn't involved in these sessions, right?
No.
It was kind of a strategic leadership counseling session to figure out how to approach it.
Yeah, or a strategic intervention to a large degree. It's kind of what we called it behind closed doors. And so it was really hard because, again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings as a 7. I want you to like me. Now I'm willing to press and challenge. But when it gets really, really deep, and it may cut really deep, even though it's for your benefit, that's really stinking hard for me. And so we did a lot of time with this counselor. We spent a lot of time very prayerfully considering how do we present this information to this individual. And it was really, really hard. And, she was crying fairly uncontrollably. We thought halfway through that she was going to quit, kind of I can't take this, I'm out of here. So we were kind of prepared for all responses that could have occurred. But what I learned out of that was, even if it's hard and being very direct and very truthful, it not tomorrow, but eventually is for the best. For that person, for the organization, for your own leadership and growth. It felt like everybody took a collective step forward. Now, again, we may have paced differently in that step, but the things that we shared were really, really tough. But it's helped me as I've grown in my leadership to really take on that we're just going to be direct. We're going to speak in love, but we can't sweep anything under the table because as hard as it might be, we are going to grow from it.
That's right.
Collectively and individually. But it's one of the hardest 2 weeks I've ever had as a leader because the conversation was heavier than any other. Hey, Matt, you dropped the ball on a report due Friday. Those are fine. I mean, where personality and wiring and problems and flaws are all involved, and you're sort of exposing some of those of how it bubbles into your work. It's really, really tough.
That's leadership, though. I mean, the fact that you and your team, first of all, took the time to invest. You invested in this individual. You could have said, you know what, it's not working. I don't even want to deal with him or her. It's her in this case. Let's just cut bait. But you took time to invest in this quote unquote intervention.
Right.
Had some counseling, wise counsel around you, then to go to her and approach it that way. That's huge. That's huge. So today, and I think I know the answer because you touched on it a minute ago, but there's so much information out there about leadership and this mystical, tangible, or maybe intangible thing called leadership. I mean, there's countless books. I can't remember, but I think Amazon had 60,000 or something like that books on leadership that were out there. So if you really want to learn on it, and you want to double down, and you want to research it, there's plenty of things to research. But what, in your opinion, from your experiences that you'd like to share with the audience, what do you think is lacking? What do you feel that is lacking in leadership today that could help be transformative, for people that are leading others into the future, particularly in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And you're right. Leadership, even when you hear that word, right, you think of the 60,000 books, the speakers, the topics, the podcasts. I mean, it's never ending.
That's right. That's right.
And there's a lot of, you can know it, but can you do it? Right. And I think that's where our cultures really become flawed a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've worked with leaders where they knew leadership, right? Yep. They read the books, they had an MBA, right? But that's in a vacuum.
It's in a vacuum.
And it's not in the real world.
No.
Right? The real world is when you've got an employee who's a cancer.
Yeah.
The real world is when you've got a global pandemic.
Yep.
When you've got a recession or an economic crisis. Like, what do you do?
Yep.
When you've got moral failures in your office? How do you lead? So I think that what is really lacking in society today, one is getting it out of head knowledge to application. But even layering that is humility, right? And I think what's interesting is when you really look at all of the leadership topics and speakers and those types of things that are out there, there seems to be a lack of a message of it's okay to not be okay as a leader. It's okay to not be perfectly buttoned up as a leader, which again goes back to what we've talked about.
Yep. That's
it's
right.
It's okay to say, I have no stinking idea what the answer is. Well, and when everybody's looking at you as a leader going, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. And Andy Cook at Promise 686 that you've talked about and that you've interviewed, one of the things that I love about him is when I came on board a year ago, I'd ask him, hey, what are we going to do in this area? What do you think about this strategy? I don't know. I hired you. What do you want to go do?
Yeah.
That to me is leadership. And that's an area of leadership that I think is lacking.
Yeah, sure.
Is delegation, is humility.
Yeah. He had enough humility to come right out and be transparent to say, I don't know.
Right. Right. Which empowers you as a leader under another leader.
Yeah.
Right. You really know, okay, this guy believes in me.
Yeah.
He's equipping me and empowering me.
Oh, yeah.
And he's going to get out of your way.
Yeah.
And I think really good leadership is asking your team, asking your people, do you have what you need? How can I help?
Yep.
And how can I get out of the way?
Yeah, that's right.
And in doing that, it's okay to not have all the answers.
Yeah, having the humility as a leader to step aside, make sure your people are equipped, obviously, but to step aside, equip, empower, and let them go. What that reveals within an organization reveals where are my other leaders, right? Because the other leaders are going to then take that and run 100% with it.
Another thing I'll add too is it's a phrase that I learned from my dad is stack the chairs. So I've watched my dad in multiple positions of leadership for 38 years. And one of the things I've always loved about him is if he's ever at an event, and when he was in the political world for 10 years, he had all these public events.
Yeah.
And inevitably at the end of the night, the people in the audience or the volunteers were stacking the chairs in the back of the room, right? It might've been at a civic center or whatever it might be. They got to flip the room for the next day. And without fail, my dad was in the back stacking chairs. And so when I think about humility, right, that's humility in action, is literally and figuratively being willing to not finish your talk or finish your presentation or walk the halls, whatever it is, but it's stacking the chairs, it's taking out the trash, right? And I think that's something that's really lacking a lot too, is the willingness to do the things that maybe you did 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you did when you started the organization, when you had to do everything.
Yep.
But never losing that.
That's right.
I think is rare. And I think that's a differentiator among leaders too.
Yeah. It goes to the very simple phrase, but lead by example, right? 100%. I mean, that really is what that embodies. So if you could give a leadership award to someone in your life outside of work,
okay,
who would you give it to and why?
Yeah. May get emotional in this one. So I've had a lot of mentors in my life. And mentorship to me is effective leadership. It's life on life leadership, right?
Yeah.
And discipleship really to an even deeper degree. So there's a guy named Rick Woolworth who runs a group called Telemachus. Telemachus, you may or may not know this, when Odysseus went off to war, he wanted to find a man in the community who could teach, lead, and guide his son, Telemachus, and the man's name was Mentor. And so Rick started an organization called Telemachus, which basically was intergenerational friendships. And so how do you bring successful, high-achieving believers, connecting them with the next generation of emerging leaders. And he experienced that firsthand. And so Rick, I kind of got plugged into this organization about 4 years ago, and it's really been life-changing for me. But about 15 months ago, Rick called me one day out of the blue and said, look, I want to get back to the end of the line of what this organization stands for. And I want to mentor you and one other individual one-on-one. And I want to get back to that life-on-life mentorship that we talk about, that we teach, and that the organization really exists to do. And so Rick started doing that. And I remember I had my first call with Rick over Zoom. He was up in Greenwich, I'm out here in Atlanta. And we talked for about 90 minutes. And I said, Rick, I want to figure out what the flow of this looks like. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, is it going to be biweekly or monthly or quarterly? And he goes, no, it's whenever you want it. I told you that I was a resource for you because I want to walk with you in life-on-life mentorship. And he said, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, it's a product of a very broken guy sitting in this chair. And he was like, let's get back on the phone next week. So I had the opportunity to just ask questions. Great mentors ask questions.
Of course.
So he asked a ton of questions. Inevitably, you ask a lot of questions. Yeah. And learning where his story and failures and successes intersected mine.
Wow.
In the work world, in my family life, being a husband, a dad, investing in the community. And that's where you're able to mentor is, hey, well, this is my experience 25 years ago. Jill and I went through this, this is what we have done in our marriage for 25 years. And so the takeaways are, well, we're doing that, right? So these little just brick upon brick foundational things that he added to or replaced, he backfilled a lot of some gaps in my childhood. He helped you really unpack all of that. 100%. And then learn applicational tools, right? That. Even as a 38-year-old, which is being humble enough to go, okay, I got some gaps here. Yeah. And so Rick, I would give that award 10 times over. He actually passed away in December of a aortic dissection suddenly.
Yeah. I remember you told me that.
But he played and really still plays kind of ongoing a pretty significant role in my life.
That's huge. I think that is business leaders, we have, coaches and other things, but, and we try to learn from other leaders, but that life on life leadership philosophy, where you're really doing real life and holistically, we talked about with another podcast guest that, he believed what was missing in leadership was integrity. And by definition, kind of integrity, really it's your whole life. Everything is tied together. You can't put this on the shelf. This is my leadership and my work qualities at work. And this is what it is at home. And they're two different separate things. Right. They're all tied together, but that life on life leadership philosophy and mentorship philosophy is that hits to the heart of what we all need. Mm-hmm. I know it's what I need. I crave it all the time. So, well, John, unfortunately we've reached the end of the time here. As I wrap up for the audience, this has been amazing. I mean, really has been amazing. We probably could go on, and I know we have another episode that we're going to do with you, but we could go on and talk about this. But I hope that the audience took away from today several of the things that John talked about. I'll summarize a few of them: building equity in relationships, a heart to listen. Leaders they must have a heart to listen. Leadership requires vulnerability, and it requires humility. John talked about today, what was missing in leadership in his opinion was, that there's head knowledge out there, but how that head knowledge is then converted to application and really kind of tied to humility, right? And some of the things that you've done, and having the humility to equip and empower your people, which that's how you discover other leaders. Get out of the way and make sure that they know, look, I don't have all the answers, but I'm relying on you to have some of the answers. And I think that's big. So guys, thanks for joining us today. Tune in on our next episode when we learn a little bit more about John Flores, his personal life, and some of the other things that have shaped him personally as he's become really a dynamic leader. Thanks as we continue to go and lead above and beyond. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.